Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into the explosive, chaotic, and brilliantly bizarre world of Starship Troopers. This cult sci-fi classic is packed with behind-the-scenes stories, unexpected details, and strange production secrets most fans have never heard. Get ready, because we're about to unpack 20 weird facts that will completely change how you see this movie. Starship Troopers looked like just another sci-fi shoot-'em-up, a galaxy at war with its own monsters. But beneath the firepower was something far stranger. Casting became a battlefield before the first shot was fired. Even the costumes preached control, and the invasion never stopped. It just changed forms. These are 20 weird facts about Starship Troopers. And hidden inside the uniforms and the propaganda reels, it was propaganda sharpened into parody. You don't just watch this movie, you're recruited by it. Number 1. Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, published in 1959, was many things: a bold vision of space warfare, a hymn to discipline, and to some, an unsettling love letter to militarism. The book was embraced by fans of hard sci-fi, but it also courted controversy. Some schools banned it outright, calling its vision of civic virtue through military service fascistic. For decades, Hollywood toyed with adapting it, but the idea of turning Heinlein's stern, serious vision into a film seemed risky. Enter Paul Verhoeven, the Dutch provocateur who had already skewered corporate culture with RoboCop. When the script landed on his desk, he admitted he barely made it 2 chapters in before tossing it aside, muttering, "This is fascism." But Verhoeven's rejection became the film's creative spark. Instead of glorifying Heinlein's world, he and co-writer Ed Neumeyer used it as scaffolding for something bolder, a satire so sharp it disguised itself as spectacle. They stripped Heinlein's moral absolutism for irony, injecting parody into the propaganda, turning noble cadetsies into poster-perfect cannon fodder. What Heinlein had written straight, Verhoeven filmed crooked. The $100 million epic that emerged wasn't just bug battles and explosions. It was a mirror, showing audiences how easily militarism can be dressed up as entertainment. Number 2. The first draft of Starship Troopers wasn't even Starship Troopers. Screenwriter Ed Neumeyer had scribbled a called Bug Hunt at Outpost 9, a pulpy story about nameless soldiers fighting giant insects. No ideology, no satire, just a straightforward alien war. For a while, that's all it was destined to be, a low-budget monster movie no studio cared much about. Then, Sony bought the rights to Heinlein's book, and suddenly, the pieces snapped together. What had been a no-name Bug Hunt script was welded onto Heinlein's mythology. Overnight, Neuer's generic draft inherited a legacy. The mobile infantry, the citizenship for service theme, the stern military culture, and with Verhoeven in the director's chair, it gained something else: bite. Together they twisted Heinlein's earnest vision into a parody wearing its skin. The book gave them structure, but Verhoeven and Neumeyer gave it irony. Now those endless bug battles weren't just action, they were spectacle designed to lure audiences in, only to confront them with the absurdity of propaganda. What started as a throwaway creature feature had been reborn as a $100 million Trojan horse, a satire disguised as a space opera. Number 3. Sony Pictures in the mid-90s was chaos. Executives were shuffled in and out so quickly that no one ever had time to truly grasp what Paul Verhoeven was making. One week, the film was just another big-budget science fiction actioner. By the time someone looked close enough to notice the satire woven through the script, the propaganda reels, the fascist uniforms, the gloriously over-the-top militarism, that executive was already out the door, replaced by another who barely skimmed the project notes. Verhoeven later called it a gift. With a $15 million budget already greenlit and no steady hand watching over his shoulder, he had a rare kind of freedom in Hollywood, the ability to make a movie that mocked the very militarism it appeared to celebrate. To most in the studio, it looked like a flashy alien war movie, nothing more. But on set, Verhoeven and screenwriter Ed Neumeyer knew exactly what they were smuggling into theaters. A razor-sharp parody wrapped in spectacle, which should have been killed in a boardroom, survived because the boardroom itself was in shambles. And that's how a satire that should never have gotten through the system slipped into cinemas disguised as a blockbuster. Number 4. Finding the right faces for Starship Troopers was its own battlefield. The studio wanted bankable names, young stars who could sell posters and pull teenagers into theaters. At one point, Johnny Rico might have been played by Keanu Reeves, James Marsden, or even Jason Priestley. Carmen, meanwhile, nearly went to Neve Campbell, fresh off Party of Five, but scheduling with Scream 2 took her out of the running. Paul Verhoeven, though, had a very different idea. He didn't want meat stars with baggage. He wanted blank slates, fresh-faced recruits who looked like they'd stepped out of a propaganda reel. He wanted actors the audience could project onto, people who looked flawless but somehow too polished, almost artificial. That's why Casper Van Dien, Denise Richards, Dina Meyer, and Neil Patrick Harris ultimately won the roles.
They weren't the first choices, they weren't even the studio's favorites, but they had that strange blend of youth and gloss. Beautiful, untested, and unscarred. Exactly the kind of soldiers you'd plaster across a poster to recruit a new generation. The irony was clear. The casting itself became part of the satire, an army of Hollywood perfect faces marching off to die. Number 5. The soldiers of Starship Troopers looked less like raw recruits and more like a fashion catalog. Paul Verhoeven wanted them that way. Clean jaws, perfect smiles, glossy hair, the kind of faces you'd see in propaganda posters from the 1940s. Critics mocked the casting as 90210 Goes to War, since Casper Van Dien and Denise Richards were in their 20s, playing kids fresh out of high school. Verhoeven admitted he'd hoped for younger actors, but the studio thought they'd look too inexperienced. In the end, the mismatch became part of the satire, an army of Hollywood perfect faces marching off to die.
Joke. These weren't gritty warriors. They were idealized mannequins, soldiers sculpted to sell the fantasy of a flawless fascist future by making them too polished, too pretty, and too old. Verhoeven exposed how propaganda thrives on appearances, not reality. Number 6. In Heinlein's novel, Dizzy Flores was a man barely more than a background presence. For the film, Ed Neumeyer flipped the character into a woman played by Dina Meyer and gave her a fiery devotion to Johnny Rico. The script set up a bold triangle, Johnny torn between Dizzy's loyalty and Carmen's ambition, with Xander hovering in the mix. Early cuts even ended with Carmen and Johnny sharing a kiss while Dizzy's romance burned brighter. But test audiences balked. They called Carmen immoral for loving two men and hated the idea of her choosing career over romance. Studio notes pushed for simpler emotions, and Carmen's kiss was cut. What could have been a messy, modern take on desire was sanded down into a safer arc. Dizzy's sacrifice became the emotional anchor, while Carmen was left punished by fan judgment. A reminder that sometimes audiences rewrite the movie as much as the filmmakers do. Number 7. When audiences see the blasted alien world of Klendathu, they're looking at a very real piece of Earth, a jagged patch of Wyoming nicknamed Hell's Half-Acre. The location was so desolate it barely seemed human, with cliffs and rock formations sharp enough to feel otherworldly. But for the cast, shooting there was closer to punishment than acting. They were dressed head to toe in heavy trooper uniforms, layered with body armor, helmets, and rifles that weighed a small fortune. Under the Wyoming sun, temperatures soared past 100 degrees. The suits trapped every drop of sweat, turning the actors into walking ovens. Jake Busey collapsed from heat stroke and was rushed to the hospital. Others fought through exhaustion, raw sunburns, and bloody blisters from boots shredded by the rough terrain. To keep people upright, crew members had to cut ventilation holes into the uniforms. Verhoeven, of course, brushed it off with a grin, insisting the suffering only made the soldiers look more convincing. And in a twisted way, he was right. On screen, the mobile infantry looks battered, desperate, and overwhelmed by the alien landscape. What audiences didn't realize was that they were watching the actors fight the environment just as fiercely as they fought the bugs. Number 8. For all their digital ferocity, the arachnids weren't born in a computer alone. They came alive in chaos on set. When actors fired their rifles into the barren Wyoming desert, they weren't aiming at anything real. Instead, they shot at poles with tennis balls perched on top, broom handles waving in the wind, or sometimes at director Paul Verhoeven himself. He would leap into frame, screeching and flailing his arms like a deranged insect, shouting, "I'm a big bug, I'll kill you!" The cast couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity until the cameras rolled and they had to summon real terror. Behind the madness was Phil Tippett, the stop-motion genius of Jurassic Park and Return of the Jedi. Tippett choreographed how the bugs should move, crawl, and swarm, earning the cheeky credit of bug movement consultant. Industrial Light and Magic then pushed CGI to its breaking point, building arachnids with hundreds of moving parts. Some of the wide battle shots took nearly 24 hours to render a single frame. On screen, the bugs are relentless, swarming like nightmares made flesh. But the secret behind their menace, a strange marriage of Verhoeven's manic energy, Tippett's choreography, and a mountain of sleepless nights in ILM's render farms. Number 10. The film's carnage pushed the MPAA to the breaking point. Exploding torsos, decapitated heads, soldiers sucked dry by brain bugs. The gore was so relentless the board threatened an NC-17 rating. Verhoeven refused to cut his set pieces, trimming only seconds of the most graphic dismemberments. What remained was still staggering, bodies torn apart in front of screaming soldiers, blood spraying against alien shells. Audiences had never seen carnage presented with such glossy confidence, and critics accused it of sadism. But for Verhoeven, the gore wasn't indulgence. It was his way of showing the true cost of militarism. War as both spectacle and meat grinder. Number 11. When the arachnids obliterate Buenos Aires with a meteor strike, the destruction looked disturbingly real, because it was. Verhoeven used footage from the 1991 Oakland Hills firestorm in California, which killed 25 people and destroyed thousands of homes. By blending this real-world disaster into his satirical sci-fi, he grounded the spectacle in human suffering. The result was haunting, a futuristic apocalypse that carried the weight of genuine tragedy. Audiences expecting only campy bug battles suddenly felt a gut punch of realism.
In Verhoeven's hands, even special effects doubled as a mirror to the horrors of our own world. Number 12. The same team who skewered corporate fascism in RoboCop rejoined Verhoeven to craft Starship Troopers' unforgettable propaganda reels. "Would you like to know more?" became an instant catchphrase lifted straight from wartime recruitment films and Nazi-era newsreels. Quick cuts showed children stomping bugs, soldiers smiling as they signed up, and executions broadcast like public service ads. The tone was so sharp, some viewers missed the parody entirely, believing they were meant to cheer. But that was Verhoeven's trick: disguise satire in the glossy packaging of propaganda, then let the audience wonder whether they'd been fooled. Number 13. Paul Verhoeven didn't stumble into fascist imagery in Starship Troopers. He designed it frame by frame as a mirror that dared audiences to look back at themselves. The propaganda reels that opened the film were lifted shot for shot from Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, Nazi cinema rebranded as futuristic news. The gleaming skylines came straight from the playbook of Albert Speer, Hitler's architect of grandeur and control. Even the uniforms told a story. Costume designer Ellen Myrojic dressed officers in black leather coats, silver insignias, and high collars echoing the SS and Mussolini's black shirts. Verhoeven, who had grown up under Nazi occupation in the Netherlands, wanted no subtlety. His perfect future gleamed with beauty, discipline, and order, but only as a mask for dehumanization. When Michael Ironside asked why he was making a fascist movie, Verhoeven gave the answer that defined the entire production. "If I
tell people fascism is bad, they won't listen. So I'll show them a fascist world, shiny, glamorous, seductive, and let them feel the horror hiding inside it." Audiences in 1997 didn't all get the joke. Some took it at face value. Others saw only B-movie spectacle. But decades later, the film's costumes and architecture aren't just aesthetics. They're warnings, wrapped in style, sharp enough to cut. Number 14. On the surface, Starship Troopers paints Earth as the victim. Buenos Aires destroyed by an alien meteor, humanity striking back in righteous fury. But look closer, and the propaganda crumbles. In the film's backstory, it wasn't the bugs who struck first. It was us. Human colonists ignored quarantine zones, marched into arachnid territory, and planted illegal settlements on their planets. The bugs retaliated, not out of mindless malice, but defense. Verhoeven designed it that way, a mirror of how empires have always rewritten history, painting expansion as destiny and resistance as aggression. The soldiers believe they're defending civilization, but the truth is harsher. They're the invaders, the trespassers, the aggressors. That twist flips the whole film on its head. The enemy isn't some monstrous alien swarm. The real enemy is us and the lies we're willing to believe to justify war. Number 15. When Starship Troopers first screened for a test audience, the room fractured. Some laughed nervously at the propaganda ads, recognizing the satire. Others took them at face value, cheering the military slogans like recruits. Sony executives froze. Was this supposed to be comedy, straight action, or something dangerously in between? Notes piled in, urging Verhoeven to clarify the tone, warning that audiences might misread the film entirely. But he refused to soften the edges. That confusion was the point, to make viewers feel trapped inside the propaganda itself. The divided response rattled the studio, but it also locked in the movie's strange power. A film that plays safe is forgotten. A film that unsettles its own test audience is destined to linger. Number 16. When Starship Troopers first screened for a test audience, the room fractured. Some laughed nervously at the propaganda ads, recognizing the satire. Others took them at face value, cheering the military slogans like recruits. Sony executives froze. Was this supposed to be comedy, straight action, or something dangerously in between? Notes piled in, urging Verhoeven to clarify the tone, warning that audiences might misread the film entirely. But he refused to soften the edges. That confusion was the point, to make viewers feel trapped inside the propaganda itself. The divided response rattled the studio, but it also locked in the movie's strange power. A film that plays safe is forgotten. A film that unsettles its own test audience is destined to linger. Studio executives grew uneasy, afraid they had backed a movie with the wrong message. The backlash helped sink the box office, and Verhoeven's reputation in Hollywood took a blow. Yet, over time, those same critiques became the film's greatest vindication. The fact that so many mistook parody for propaganda was the point, a warning about how seductive the aesthetics of fascism can be, even when they're meant as a joke. Number 17. By every metric, Starship Troopers should have been a hit. It had a $15 million budget, wall-to-wall bug battles, groundbreaking CGI, and more ammunition fired than most war films of its decade. But when it opened in 1997, it grossed only $121 million worldwide, barely covering its marketing costs. Sony declared it a failure, and Verhoeven's reputation in Hollywood took a serious hit. Yet the story didn't end in the box office. On VHS, DVD, and cable reruns, the movie crawled back into living rooms. Audiences who missed the satire the first time suddenly began quoting lines, laughing at the propaganda reels, and realizing the fascist war movie was really mocking itself. What flopped on opening weekend turned into one of the defining cult films of the late 90s. Number 18. In 1997, Starship Troopers was written off as a bloated misfire, too violent, too glossy, too shallow. But the years were kind. By the 2000s, professors began pulling it into film courses, not as failed sci-fi, but as razor-sharp satire.
The propaganda reels became lecture material, dissected alongside Leni Riefenstahl and Cold War newsreels. Students were asked, were you cheering for the heroes or for fascism itself? After 9/11, the questions hit even harder. The film's blind nationalism, its cries for endless war, echoed headlines in real life. What once looked like pulp now felt prophetic, a warning that had been hiding in plain sight. Slowly, the movie climbed from punchline to case study. By the 2010s, it wasn't just a cult favorite, it was required viewing, a satire that had outlived the critics who misunderstood it. Number 19. Starship Troopers didn't die in 1997, it mutated. 2 years later, fans turned on Saturday morning TV and found Roughnecks, the Starship Troopers Chronicles, a CGI series that shocked parents with its grit. Episodes ran darker than expected, with soldiers maimed, lost in space, and fighting wars that never seemed to end. Budget problems forced the show to halt before its finale, leaving battles unresolved. But for a generation of kids, it was their first taste.
Verhoeven's bleak universe. Then came the films. In 2004, Phil Tippett, the stop-motion legend who had animated Bugs in the original, directed Hero of the Federation, a stripped-down, low-budget sequel heavy on gore and chaos. Fans dismissed it as camp, but 4 years later, Marauder tried again. Casper Van Dien returned as Johnny Rico, now grizzled and scarred, fighting on a galaxy that had forgotten the golden propaganda sheen of his youth. Japan kept the flame alive, turning the saga into anime-inspired CGI films, Invasion in 2012 and Traitor of Mars in 2017. None reached the cultural heights of the original, but together they proved the same thing the movie had always suggested. Fascism doesn't vanish, it adapts, it mutates, it keeps marching. Even in cheap sequels and strange spin-offs, the troopers kept fighting. Number 20. The cult following didn't just rewatch the movie, they wanted to live inside its world. In 1997, the film hit arcades with Prepare for Battle and even a Sega pinball machine. Then came Terran Ascendi in 2000, a tactical PC game that finally gave players the powered armor Heinlein described in his novel. By 2005, fans were blasting arachnids in a first-person shooter set years after the film, with Casper Van Dien lending his voice as a commander. If we don't kick the bugs out, your home could be next. Japan embraced the franchise too, with spin-offs crossing into anime-style storytelling. None of the games became classics, but together they proved the bugs never really died. For gamers and fans alike, the war just kept respawning. Bonus fact for Paul Verhoeven: Starship Troopers marked both a peak and an ending.
And those were 20 weird and surprising facts about Starship Troopers, 1997. If you enjoyed exploring the world of arachnids, satire, and sci-fi madness, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me which movie you want next. Thanks for watching. Remember, service guarantees citizenship and more awesome movie facts.